Now, Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi says the national minimum wage has been increased to about 21 Rand 69 cents an hour as from the 1st of March. This is up from 20 Rand 76 cents. The national minimum wage is the amount paid to ordinary hours of work, and does not include any other allowances such as transport, tools, food or accommodation, etc. This also doesn't include other amounts like tips, bonuses and gifts. To help us understand this a bit better, let's bring in the Minister himself, Thulas Nxesi, joining us via our video link. Minister, thanks for your time and welcome to the program. So many economics textbooks will tell us that if you increase the minimum wage, you're likely to also increase unemployment in a society. And the idea is, if there's more to be paid in the form of minimum wage, fewer businesses can afford it, and so those businesses are likely to let workers go. Is that something you're worried about?
We will always be worried about any form of retrenchment. But I must tell you, Ayanda, that this is done scientifically. It's done through the research by the National Wage Commission and the experts in that particular field. And the Act requires that the National Wage Commission to review these rates annually and make recommendations to the minister. They must take into consideration the cost of living, the gross domestic product, the wage levels, and collective bargaining outcomes, the productivity, the ability of the employers to carry on their business successfully, and the operation of the small, the medium, and the micro enterprises, and also you talk about the new enterprises, and the likely impact of those recommendations on the employment. So they do all that particular research and come up with a figure which they think that it has taken into consideration all what which I'm talking about. So it's not an imposition. And the Minimum Wage Commission, by the way, is a group of people who are drawn from the different sectors, including the employer groups and the employee groups, who are able to sit and deal with this issue. But in any case, Ayanda, the issues of wage increment are always disputed, controversial. There's a lot of big fighting and so on. But this is just meant to deal with the issues of equality and the wage gap. So if we don't do it with the low wage workers, what should we do?
Absolutely.
So we have taken into consideration all that before we could be able to pronounce on this.
And this is important to state because if there is any adverse effect, we also know from history it's likely to affect the low wage earners, so to speak, at least first. In this particular case, we're seeing it's an increase of about 93 cents. We're not privy to the conversations taking place behind closed doors. And many people who aren't also following this closely might look at 93 cents and think, this is not much. How would we substantiate this particular figure for this particular increase?
You see, Ayanda, it's very interesting. Previously, the minimum wage was 20 Rand 76, and it has gone up now to this 21 Rand 69. It is significant, but it might not be satisfactory to all the people. You know that the issue of the wage is important. And this increase is based on the 3% inflation rate plus the additional, what we said, 1.5, in order to maintain the value of the national minimum wage in terms of the purchasing power. So that's what has been considered. And remember that this will be applicable from the 1st of March, but it has to be reviewed annually. It has to be reviewed annually. And remember that the whole agricultural sector, and we're talking about the evidence here, was not severely affected for that matter when you're talking about those workers who are in the farms or the farm workers. they were not affected severely by the COVID lockdown, as the global food chains constituted an essential service at the time of the lockdown. But it can have an impact on the domestic workers, because the minimum wage for the domestic workers is increased to 88% of the national minimum wage, which translates into 19.9% per hour. So we have taken into consideration some of the sectors. By the way, I must emphasize this, Ayanda. The Act includes for employers that are genuinely unable to pay the proposed adjustments to apply for the exemption. And the Commission will be able to look into all that, and people must open all the books so that they can be able to show that indeed this is what we are earning, this is our profit, hence we are not able to pay our workers this minimum wage. So everything must be transparent, then they can be able to be given an exemption.
Right. We also know, Minister, that a lot of the workers who are affected as individuals have very little bargaining power, sometimes against their employers. How confident are you in our ability to track that these legislation are actually able to filter down, especially for workers who, like I mentioned, feel they don't have a voice to force their employer to comply with these laws?
This act came into force from January 2019, which was setting this precedence for the protection of these low-earning vulnerable workers. And you are right, individual workers are so vulnerable, and it was meant for the reduction of the inequality in the national labor market. And I must emphasize this. It is illegal and an unfair labor practice for the employer to unilaterally also just alter the hours or any other conditions of employment in implementing the national minimum wage. And this is payable as the ordinary workers. But what you are raising, we have our inspectors. Our inspectors who have to do all the work, inspecting all the workplaces, where they look into the conditions of the basic conditions of employment, if they are being adhered to, and these issues of the salaries and everything else. If they found something which is irregular, they are able to report that, and we have to deal with those employers. And dealing with them, we normally adopt a corrective measure which says, we don't want to punish at first. We just tell the person that this is how you have to do things, and we're giving you so much time to be able to do that. So our inspections there inspectors will be doing those inspections to deal with all those issues, which to ensure that there is monitoring, or there is implementation and monitoring that this thing is happening. But let's be fair. We're dealing with close to 3 million workplaces in this particular country. Yeah. And we have been having about 400 inspectors nationwide. We've just added now about 500 from this budget of this year in order to increase our visibility, because we're talking about a number of sectors with different issues we have to deal with.
That's exactly what I was alluding to, Minister, the capacity to actually follow this in a satisfactory manner. Would you agree then that as things stand, the department is probably incapacitated to reach all the corners, so to speak, and ensure that, we have a clear understanding of what's actually happening on the ground?
But we also, rely on the goodwill of the employers. As much as we do have the labor inspectors to carry out the inspections to secure this compliance, we are heavily reliant on the chief ops from the workers, the shop stewards, the trade unions, and who must be able to give us the information, but also from socially responsible employers.
But I mean,
to
does that make
point to
sense?
them in the right direction if there are issues.
If I was, and I hear you, and I think in an ideal world, it really would work beautifully. But if I was an employer who is not following the act to the letter of the law, so to speak, why would I be upfront about that to a department that I know is unlikely to find me because they simply don't have the staff to inspect whether I'm doing things right? I mean, it's almost, you're suggesting to me that the employer should be the referee and a player in this situation, and we know that's unlikely to pan out well.
We're not suggesting that.
Right.
We are saying on these collective bargaining issues, on these conditions, on this legislation, you want socially responsible employers who are going to follow the law, because if they do not do it, they are breaking the law. But also, we have the call centers where the employees can be able to call us anonymously and be able to tell us what is going on, and then we're able to make a follow-up. But we're also talking about another ideal world. And the real world is, there's no way that would even have 1 million inspectors. We won't be able to have that. As I'm speaking to you, the public service has 1.1 million workers of all the departments. So to think that we can have a million, as an example, inspectors, it's not going to happen. But I think where we have been able to visit those employers, there must be an impact. And in this instance, there's going to be a focus on these employers if they are doing their work. And we're going to be using all the trade unions are very important for us, because now the domestic workers are also organized. They are organized in their union, and they will be able also to tell us what is going on as to whether people are complying or not complying. Yeah. Some of the people have been complying. The majority of the people have been complying. It's only a few people who have not been complying.
All right. I'm glad you bring up trade unions, because we know that unions in the public service are also in conversations with government around wages, but in a different way. Dates back to that 2018 wage agreement. It's been escalated now to the Constitutional Court. We know that all this money comes from one basket, the public purse. In a context where we've increased the minimum wage for some of these low-income earners, what are the prospects that will also be able to increase wages for those in the public service, again, given constraints on the fiscus?
I will not run away from this question by saying the responsible minister is the Minister of Public Service. And yes, but as part of government, I can say everything, Ayanda, whatever you do, you look at the issue of the affordability and sustainability of what you are going to do. And that's what we've done, for instance, when we're dealing with this issue of the minimum wage. And I think even the debates at the level of the public service, it is around that particular issue of affordability and sustainability. And remember that even before the lockdown, the economy of this country was already going down. And that has to be taken into consideration as to, is the government able to collect more taxes? What is happening at the level of the revenue, which is clear that there are problems. However, I don't believe, and then I'm saying this as a Minister of Labour, I've always said, and I'll continue to say, I've said it when I've been dealing with a number of disputes. One of them is the SABC. I've said it's not helping to rush to the courts. The courts are not going to resolve the problems, the bargaining problems. They might take a decision which would be uncomfortable on one side, but only to find that the dispute has not been resolved. I've always encouraged that the public sector unions, together with the employer, which includes me, must be able to sit and look for compromises, because there must be compromises. And what do I mean by that? If you are faced with a crisis of jobs, you choose whether are you going to increase the salaries or are you going to protect the jobs? And so it's always a very difficult balancing act. And I think all of us, they need to understand that, of course, taking into consideration where inflation is and the standard of living. So at the end, it needs all parties, both government and the public sector unions, to start talking about compromises But courts are not going to help us, because what courts might do might even have a negative impact on the future negotiations which you want to do. So it means we must put our heads together and try and deal with this particular matter.
Yeah, and I imagine the courts would rather spend this time doing other things. So you're absolutely right. Meeting each other's stakeholders is more important than anything else. But Minister, I wouldn't be forgiven if I don't ask you about what perhaps is top of mind for many South Africans, the issue of corruption, even as we extend the UIF TERS relief. Take us through some of the measures, the concrete measures that are being put in place to try and address this in the context of increased uncertainty, worry, trust that government is able to get this right.
Let me just preface this by saying we have extended, as announced by the President, the COVID-19 TERS benefit until the 15th of March. And then after discussion with the social partners at NEDLEC and taking into account the issues of affordability and sustainability of the whole UIF fund, we have also agreed that there are sectors that are still not fully operational. And what are those sectors? I mean, if you're talking about tourism, you're talking about hospitality, you're talking about the liquor industry and related sectors within that particular value chain. You can see that it's very difficult. Some of them have not opened. So we have agreed that we'll negotiate the proper terms and conditions of this extension, which will be announced by the UIF after consulting with the partners. But I think the issue of corruption, as you have indicated, you know that government has become very tough. As an example, during this COVID period, we've had to have some audits and dealing with whether it's PPEs, but in my case, with the corruption in the UIF. And I must emphasize this, Ayanda. There's always a corrupter and a corruptee. There are syndicates of the workers who are inside us in our UIF, but there are also employers who are involved in this thing. So it's both in the public and in the private sector. And that's the matter we're dealing with. And you know what the Fusion Center is doing, the security cluster is doing in relation to this matter. I can tell you that we have a number of people who have been arrested, who have appeared in court. And the latest is that last week, one of our officials, who's an inspector, was arrested working with a syndicate in Velcom. They appeared in court and they've been remanded into custody. So there are many who are going to be dealt with. And we have adopted a program which we call Follow the Money. And we have 9 audit firms who are following all those billions, whether they were paid to the right workers, whether they were paid to the workers in any case, or to bogus companies and so on. So it's still going to take us some time to be able to get that over and above what the SIU is doing and the Fusion Center. So we are intolerant to the issue of the corruption, and we are dealing with very strictly. We have suspended people, you know that, at the top level of the UIF, and some of the people have already been charged, but we can't talk about it now, right, because it's a public issue to respect their rights.
Thulas Nxesi, thanks very much for your time and your indulgence. Really appreciate it here on Newsroom Africa. That, of course, is Labour and Employment Minister Thulas Nxesi joining us there via video line. Thanks very much indeed.